A poor single mom shields a lost boy from the pouring rain with nothing but her old jacket, but when his dad's helicopter lands, shocking secrets from the past collide with the power of money and the purity of love, leaving one haunting question: will this storm bring them together as family, or tear them apart forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The late afternoon sky darkened ominously over Mason City Park. Lena Carter clutched her daughter's worn umbrella, its faded pink flowers barely visible against the gray clouds above. Her feet ached from an 8-hour shift at Joe's Diner, and her polyester uniform still smelled of coffee and grilled onions. She just wanted to get home, put her feet up, and maybe catch a quick nap before her evening shift. The first fat droplets of rain splattered against the cracked sidewalk. Lena quickened her pace, her sensible work shoes squeaking on the wet concrete. That's when she heard it, a small sniffle coming from the direction of the playground. She stopped, peering through the increasingly heavy rainfall. The park was deserted, the swings swaying eerily in the wind. But there, huddled beneath the yellow plastic slide, was a small figure. "Oh my goodness," Lena whispered. Her exhaustion forgotten, she hurried across the muddy grass, her heart pounding. As she got closer, she could make out a little boy, probably no more than 6 or 7, curled up into a tight ball. He wore expensive-looking clothes, a light blue button-down shirt and pressed khaki shorts that were now soaked through. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes were red from crying. "Hey there, sweetheart," Lena said softly, crouching down despite the mud seeping into her uniform pants. She held the umbrella over both of them. "Are you all alone out here?" The boy nodded, his lower lip trembling. Another crack of thunder made him jump, and Lena's heart broke a little at his frightened whimper. "I'm Lena," she said, keeping her voice gentle and warm. "Can you tell me your name?" Ethan?" he managed between chattering teeth. His arms were wrapped tightly around his knees, and Lena could see goosebumps on his pale skin. Without hesitation, she shrugged off her denim jacket, the one she'd saved 3 weeks of tips to buy at the second-hand store. "Here, sweetie. Let's get you warmed up a little." She draped it around his shoulders, and it engulfed his small frame like a blanket. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, pulling it closer around himself. "Ethan, are you lost? Where are your parents?" Lena looked around the empty park, hoping to see someone searching frantically for a missing child. But the rain was coming down in sheets now, obscuring her view beyond a few yards. I ran away from Miss Peterson," he said, his voice small and scared. "She's my nanny. She was talking on the phone and not paying attention, so I just left." "Oh, honey." Lena's chest tightened. She thought of her own daughter, Sarah, safe at after-school care. The terror she'd feel if Sarah went missing. "We need to find someone to help us contact your family. Is there a phone number you know?" Ethan shook his head, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "I don't know the numbers. Daddy's always working, and Mommy." His voice cracked. "Mommy's in heaven now." Lena's throat grew tight. She looked around again, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there? We need help." Her voice was nearly drowned out by another rumble of thunder. The rain drummed against her umbrella, creating a steady rhythm that somehow made the moment feel more surreal. Here she was, kneeling in the mud in her waitress uniform, trying to comfort a lost little boy who clearly came from money. His shoes alone probably cost more than she made in a week. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the scared child in front of her who needed help. "Listen, Ethan," she said, moving to sit beside him under the slide. "I promise I'm not going to leave you alone, okay? We'll stay right here together until someone comes to find you." He looked up at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Promise?" "Cross my heart," Lena said, making the gesture. "And you know what? I bet someone's already looking for you right now." Ethan sniffled and, to her surprise, leaned against her side. Lena wrapped her arm around him, holding him close as another thunderclap boomed overhead. She could feel him trembling. Though whether from cold or fear, she wasn't sure. "My mommy used to sing to me when it thundered," he said quietly. "She said angels were just moving their furniture around up in heaven." Lena smiled, blinking back tears. "That's a lovely way to think about it. Your mommy sounds like she was very wise." She was, Ethan said. She told me lots of things. Important things. He paused, looking up at Lena with an expression that seemed too serious for such a young face. She said that sometimes angels send people to help us when we need them most. The simple faith in his voice made Lena's heart squeeze. She thought about all the times in her own life when strangers had shown her kindness. The regular at the diner who always left her extra-large tips when he could tell she was having a rough day. The elderly neighbor who watched Sarah for free when Lena picked up extra shifts. "Your mommy was right about that too," she said softly. They sat together in silence for a few moments, listening to the storm rage around them. Lena's uniform was soaked through now, but she kept the umbrella steady above Ethan's head, making sure he stayed as dry as possible under her jacket. "Are you scared?" she asked, when another thunderclap made him press closer to her side. "A little," he admitted, "but not as much now. You're here." His simple trust brought fresh tears to Lena's eyes. She gave him a gentle squeeze. "That's right, sweetheart. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere until we get you back to your family." The rain continued to pour, creating a curtain of water around their shelter under the slide. Lena silently prayed that someone would come soon, while doing her best to keep Ethan calm and warm. She hummed softly, an old lullaby she used to sing to Sarah, and felt him gradually relax against her side. Above them thunder cracked again, loud enough to shake the playground equipment. Ethan clutched at Lena's arm, and she held him tighter. "It's okay," she whispered. "I've got you. I won't leave until someone comes for you. I promise." The rain intensified, drumming against Lena's small umbrella with increasing fury. She positioned herself to better shield Ethan from the deluge, but the wind kept changing direction, sending sheets of cold water against them. The little boy pressed closer to her side, his small frame shivering despite being wrapped in her jacket. "It's okay, sweetie," Lena soothed, rubbing his shoulder. "Someone will come for you soon." Her uniform was getting soaked, but she didn't care. All that mattered was keeping this child safe and warm. A distant thumping sound cut through the storm. At first, Lena thought it was thunder, but the rhythmic beat grew louder and more distinct. Suddenly, powerful searchlights pierced the gray curtain of rain, sweeping across the park. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with recognition. "Daddy!" he called out, his voice barely audible over the growing roar. A sleek black helicopter descended onto the baseball field, its rotors whipping the rain into a fierce spiral. The craft touched down with precision, its lights blazing through the stormy darkness. Before the blades had even begun to slow, the door flew open. Men in dark suits rushed out first, their shoes splashing through puddles as they ran toward the playground. Behind them strode a tall figure who moved with singular purpose. Even through the rain, Lena could see the power and authority in his bearing. This had to be Ethan's father. "Ethan!" The man's deep voice carried clearly despite the storm. "Ethan! Daddy!" Ethan broke away from Lena's side and ran toward his father. Alexander Steele dropped to one knee, catching his son in a fierce embrace. His expensive suit was instantly soaked, but he didn't seem to notice. He pressed Ethan's head against his chest, his face a mask of relief and lingering fear. "Don't you ever do that again," he said hoarsely. "Do you understand me? Never again." Lena stood quietly under her umbrella, watching the reunion with a warm smile. Her job was done. She started to turn away, planning to slip off quietly, when Ethan's voice stopped her. "Wait!" He pulled back from his father's embrace and reached for her hand. "Don't go!" Alexander Steele looked up, seeming to truly notice her for the first time. His gray eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in her waitress uniform and worn shoes. Lena felt suddenly self-conscious about her appearance, but she lifted her chin slightly. She might not be wealthy, but she had nothing to be ashamed of. "Thank you for looking after my son," Alexander said formally, rising to his full height. He towered over her, broad-shouldered and imposing in his tailored suit. "I'm Alexander Steele. I'm in your debt." "Lena Carter," she replied simply. "And anyone would have done the same." "No," Alexander said, his voice softening slightly. "They wouldn't have." Ethan tugged on Lena's hand, pulling her closer. "Daddy, this is the lady I was telling you about." Alexander's brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean, son?" Ethan looked up at Lena with complete trust in his eyes. "Mommy told me about her. She said—" He paused, then leaned closer to Lena and whispered, but loud enough for his father to hear, "Mommy says you're my daddy." The rain seemed to pause for a moment. Alexander Steele went completely still, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. His eyes locked onto Lena's face with an intensity that made her take a small step backward. I don't understand," Lena stammered, equally confused. "I've never, Miss Carter." Alexander's voice was controlled now, but there was an edge to it. "Do you know my late wife, Charlotte Steele?" Lena opened her mouth to say no, but something about the name made her pause. Charlotte. Why did that name sound familiar? Before she could respond, Ethan wrapped his arms around her waist. "Please don't go," he pleaded. "You have to come with us." "Ethan," Alexander said firmly, reaching for his son's hand. "We need to get you home and dried off. You're soaking wet." But Ethan wouldn't let go of Lena. He clung to her with surprising strength, shaking his head. "No, she has to come too. Mommy said—" "Ethan." His father's voice was gentle, but brooked no argument. "We'll sort this out later. Right now, we need to get you warm and dry." The security men had moved closer, creating a protective circle around them. One held out a large black umbrella over Alexander and Ethan. Another stepped forward to guide them toward the helicopter. "Please," Ethan said again, his grip on Lena's hand tightening. "Please, come with us." Alexander Steele looked at his son, then back at Lena. Something complicated passed across his face, confusion, suspicion, and perhaps a hint of curiosity. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. "Miss Carter," he said finally, his tone carefully neutral, "would you be willing to accompany us? It seems we have some matters to discuss." Lena hesitated. The whole situation felt surreal. The helicopter, the security detail, this powerful man looking at her with guarded eyes. But Ethan's small hand was warm in hers, and there was something in his pleading gaze that tugged at her heart. "Sir, the storm is getting worse," one of the security men warned. "We need to take off soon." Alexander held out his hand, not touching her, but clearly indicating she should walk with them. "Miss Carter?" Ethan's fingers tightened around hers as they walked toward the waiting helicopter, the rain still falling steadily around them. The little boy wouldn't release his grip on her hand, even as his father guided him forward, and Lena found herself drawn along with them, step by step, toward the sleek black aircraft. The helicopter's interior was a stark contrast to the storm outside: warm leather seats, polished wood panels, and the soft hum of expensive machinery. Lena sat awkwardly, her wet diner uniform clinging to her skin, making her even more aware of how out of place she was in this luxurious space. Ethan refused to let go of her hand, even after settling into his seat. "Please come with us," he pleaded, his big brown eyes still wet with tears. "Please, please, please." Alexander Steele stood in the cramped cabin, his tall frame commanding even in the confined space. His expression was unreadable as he looked between his son and Lena. After a moment of tense silence, he gave a curt nod. "Very well. For Ethan's sake." The pilot started the engine, and the rotors whirred to life above them. Lena's heart raced as the helicopter lifted off the ground. She'd never flown before, and her fingers tightened around Ethan's small hand. "It's okay," Ethan whispered, mimicking her earlier comfort. "Flying is fun." Alexander sat across from them, his steel-gray eyes never leaving Lena's face. The scrutiny made her uncomfortable, but she focused on Ethan, who was now pointing out the city lights below through the window. "Miss—" Alexander's deep voice cut through the engine noise. "Carter," Lena supplied. "Lena Carter. Miss Carter." His tone was careful, measured. "What my son said earlier about his mother. Did you know Charlotte?" Lena shook her head firmly. "No, sir. I've never met your wife." "Mommy told me about her," Ethan interrupted, bouncing in his seat. "She said Lena would help us one day." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Ethan, that's impossible. Your mother—" He paused, glancing at his son's innocent face. "Your mother passed away 2 years ago. She couldn't have known Miss Carter." "But she did," Ethan insisted. She showed me pictures. From when they were little. Lena's brow furrowed. I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. I don't know any Charlotte. Charlotte Green, Alexander cut in, watching her reaction closely. Before she became Charlotte Steele, the name hit Lena like a physical blow. Memories flooded back: pigtails and jump rope, shared lunches and pinky promises. Charlotte Green, her best friend from elementary school, before Charlotte's family moved away. But it couldn't be the same person, could it? Her shock must have shown on her face because Alexander leaned forward, his expression intense. So you did know her? I knew a Charlotte Green when I was very young, Lena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. We were best friends in elementary school, but her family moved away when we were 10. I never knew what happened to her after that. She kept your picture, Ethan exclaimed. In her special box. She told me stories about you. Alexander's face darkened with confusion and something else, pain perhaps. Charlotte never mentioned. He trailed off, running a hand through his dark hair. Why would she keep this secret? I don't understand either, Lena said softly. Are you sure it was me in those pictures? Your smile is the same, Ethan said with childlike certainty. And Mommy said you were the kindest person she ever knew. That's why I wasn't scared when you found me. Tears pricked at Lena's eyes. That sounded like the Charlotte she remembered, always seeing the best in people, always kind. But the idea that her childhood friend had become Mrs. Alexander Steele, that she had died leaving behind this precious little boy. The helicopter banked slightly, and through the window, Lena caught her first glimpse of the Steele estate. The mansion sprawled across manicured grounds, its windows glowing warmly against the dark storm clouds. It looked like something from a fairy tale, complete with a circular drive and perfectly trimmed hedges. I want answers, Alexander stated firmly, his voice cutting through her awe. If Charlotte knew you, if she spoke of you to our son, there must be a reason. Mr. Steele, I'm just as surprised as you are, Lena replied honestly. I haven't thought about Charlotte in years. I never knew she married you. Never knew she. She stopped, not wanting to say the word died in front of Ethan. We'll discuss this further, Alexander said as the helicopter began its descent. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. The aircraft touched down on a private helipad near the mansion. Through the continuing rain, the house looked even more impressive, up close, 3 stories of classic architecture with tall windows and intricate stonework. Lena felt smaller with each passing second. Ethan tugged at her hand as the rotors slowed. You'll stay, won't you? Please? Before Lena could respond, Alexander spoke. Miss Carter will join us inside until we sort this situation out. His eyes met hers, and despite the polite words, she could see the determination there. He wouldn't let her leave until he understood her connection to his late wife. Security personnel appeared with large umbrellas, ready to escort them inside. Lena stood shakily, her diner uniform still damp, her thoughts spinning with memories of a smiling girl with blonde pigtails who had once been her dearest friend. How had Charlotte's path led her here, to this world of wealth and privilege? And why had she told her son about Lena after all these years? The mansion loomed before them, its warm lights a sharp contrast to the cold rain and the growing mystery that surrounded them all. As they moved toward the entrance, Ethan kept his small hand firmly in hers, while Alexander walked slightly ahead, his shoulders tense with unspoken questions. The massive double doors of the Steele mansion swung open, revealing a foyer that could have housed Lena's entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors, while ornate mirrors and artwork lined the walls. Lena stood just inside the entrance, dripping rainwater onto the pristine floor, her diner uniform plastered to her body. Ethan kept his small hand firmly wrapped around hers, pressing close to her side. His wet clothes left dark patches on the expensive carpet, but he seemed unconcerned, looking up at her with complete trust. Mrs. Harrison, Alexander called sharply, and an elderly woman in a neat black uniform appeared almost instantly. Towels and dry clothes for my son, and— he paused, glancing at Lena with an unreadable expression. For our guest as well. Right away, sir. Mrs. Harrison hurried off, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. Jenkins, prepare some hot chocolate for Ethan, and— Alexander raised an eyebrow at Lena. "Oh, just water is fine," she murmured, overwhelmed by the grandeur surrounding her. "Tea," Alexander corrected firmly. "And bring it to my study." Ethan's grip on Lena's hand tightened. "I want to stay with Lena." Alexander knelt down to his son's level, his stern expression softening slightly. "Ethan, you need to get warm and dry. Mrs. Harrison will help you change, and then you can have your hot chocolate in the kitchen." "But it's okay, sweetheart," Lena said gently, though her heart ached at the fear in his eyes. "I'll still be here when you're done." Mrs. Harrison returned with an armload of fluffy white towels and what looked like designer clothing. She guided Ethan away, speaking softly to him as he kept glancing back at Lena until they disappeared up the sweeping staircase. Alexander's demeanor changed instantly. "This way," he said curtly, leading her down a hallway lined with family portraits. The study was exactly what Lena would have expected from a billionaire's private sanctuary: dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and a massive desk that probably cost more than her yearly salary. A fire crackled in an imposing stone fireplace, and despite her wet clothes, Lena felt a different kind of chill. "Sit." Alexander gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Lena perched on the edge of the seat, clutching the towel Mrs. Harrison had given her. "Mr. Steele, I know this seems strange, but I really don't." "Who are you?" He remained standing, his tall frame casting a shadow across the desk. "And what game are you playing with my son?" "I'm not playing any game," Lena said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm just a waitress who found a scared little boy in the rain. That's all." "Then explain what Ethan said about his mother." Alexander's hands gripped the back of his chair. "How does he know you?" "He doesn't. I've never met him before today, and I didn't know his mother. I'm sorry about your loss, but—" Alexander yanked open a drawer and pulled out a silver frame. He thrust it across the desk. "Look at this. And tell me again, you didn't know Charlotte." Lena took the frame with trembling hands. The moment her eyes fell on the photograph, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her breath caught in her throat. The image showed a younger Charlotte, her Charlotte, at what looked like a college graduation. Her blonde hair was shorter than Lena remembered, but that radiant smile was exactly the same. The same smile that had brightened countless summer days in their small hometown. The same smile that had made Lena feel less alone during those difficult teenage years. "Charlie?" Lena whispered, using the nickname only she had been allowed to use. Alexander's expression sharpened. "What did you say?" Lena couldn't tear her eyes from the photograph. Memories flooded back, sharing secrets in their treehouse, planning their futures, promising to be friends forever. Until Charlotte's family had moved away suddenly, leaving no forwarding address, no way to stay in touch. I didn't know," Lena said, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know she was your Charlotte. We were best friends growing up, but we lost touch when we were 17. Her family moved away. And back then, we didn't have cell phones or social media. She was just gone." Alexander sank into his chair, studying her face intently. "You're Lena Carter." She looked up, startled. "You know my name?" "Charlotte mentioned you occasionally. Said you were the sister she never had." His voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced by something closer to wonder. "She tried to find you years ago, but your family had moved as well." Lena's fingers traced Charlotte's smile in the photograph. "We made so many plans," she said softly. "We were going to go to college together, share an apartment, be in each other's weddings someday. I never knew what happened to her until—" She stopped, pain constricting her throat. "Until the news of her death made the papers," Alexander finished quietly. Lena nodded, unable to speak. She'd seen the headlines 2 years ago but hadn't connected them to her Charlie. The woman in those society pages had seemed worlds away from the girl who used to share her peanut butter sandwiches at lunch. A knock at the door broke the heavy silence. Jenkins entered with a tea tray, setting it carefully on the desk before withdrawing silently. Alexander poured 2 cups with practiced movements. "Charlotte always insisted on proper tea service," he said, pushing 1 cup toward Lena. "Even when it was just us." Lena wrapped her cold hands around the delicate china, remembering how Charlotte used to serve imaginary tea in plastic cups during their childhood playdates. The memory brought both a smile and fresh tears. "I didn't know," she repeated, looking up at Alexander. "About any of it. About her life, her marriage, her—" She glanced at the door Ethan had disappeared through. "Her beautiful little boy." Alexander's face softened fractionally. "She would have told you herself, if she could have found you." He paused, then added quietly, "She never stopped missing you." Lena sat back in the leather chair, feeling the weight of coincidence or perhaps something more than coincidence settling around her. The lost little boy in the park, his strange words about his mother, the helicopter that had brought her here. It all seemed impossible, yet here she was, holding a photograph of her long-lost best friend in her friend's husband's study. The rain continued to drum against the study's tall windows, but inside, the only sound was the quiet ticking of an antique clock and the soft crackle of the fire. Lena stared into her tea, watching the liquid swirl, trying to make sense of how her ordinary day had led her here, to this moment of extraordinary revelation. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Lena sat on the edge of the enormous four-poster bed in the guest room. The bedroom itself was bigger than her entire apartment, with heavy silk curtains and plush carpeting that felt like clouds under her feet. She had changed into borrowed clothes, soft cotton pajamas that probably cost more than her weekly salary, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. A quiet creak drew her attention to the door. There, in the dim light from the hallway, stood Ethan in blue-striped pajamas. He clutched a well-loved teddy bear with patches on its elbows, looking small and uncertain in the doorway. "Ethan?" Lena whispered. "Sweetie, what are you doing up?" He padded across the room in his sock feet, the bear swinging from one hand. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice tiny in the large room. "Can I stay with you?" Lena's heart melted at his hesitant expression. "Of course you can, honey." She patted the spot next to her on the bed. Ethan scrambled up, settling himself and his bear in her lap without invitation. The innocent trust in his gesture brought tears to her eyes. He smelled of baby shampoo and that universal scent of small children like warm cookies and sunshine. "Mr. Whiskers says thank you for saving me today," Ethan said, making the bear wave one paw. Lena smiled, running her fingers through his damp hair. "Well, tell Mr. Whiskers he's very welcome." "Mommy told me about you," Ethan said suddenly, turning those earnest eyes up to her face. "She said you were family." Lena's chest tightened. "Honey, I knew your mommy a long time ago, when we were little girls like you're, a little boy now. We were best friends. But she said—" Ethan clutched Mr. Whiskers tighter. "She said you would take care of me someday. She promised." The raw need in his voice made Lena's throat ache. She wrapped her arms around him, rocking gently. "When did she tell you this, sweetheart?" "Before she went to heaven." His lower lip trembled. "She was in the hospital bed, and she held my hand, and she said someone named Lena would come help Daddy and me when we needed her most." Lena's eyes burned with unshed tears. Charlotte must have been delirious near the end, confused by medication or memories, but the coincidence of it all, finding Ethan in that park, learning who he was, made her wonder if something bigger was at work. "I miss her so much," Ethan whispered into Mr. Whiskers' fur. "I know you do, baby." Lena stroked his back in slow circles. "I missed her too. All these years we were apart. She was the kindest, bravest person I knew when we were young." "Did you play together like I play with my friends?" "We did." Lena smiled at the memories. "We had a special hideout in her backyard, under an old oak tree. We'd pretend it was a castle or a spaceship or whatever we wanted that day." Ethan settled more heavily against her chest. "Will you stay, please? Daddy's always busy, and Maria the nanny only comes in the daytime, and I get scared at night sometimes." The weight of his trust, his need, pressed on Lena's heart. She knew she should set boundaries, explain that she couldn't stay forever in this mansion that wasn't her world. But looking down at his vulnerable face, she couldn't bring herself to say the words. "I'll stay tonight," she promised softly. "I'll be right here until you fall asleep." "And tomorrow?" His eyes were already growing heavy, but his small fingers gripped her borrowed pajama top. "We'll figure everything out tomorrow," she murmured, continuing to rock him gently. "Just rest now, sweet boy." Ethan's breathing gradually slowed and deepened. Mr. Whiskers dangled forgotten from his loose grip as he drifted off to sleep in her arms. Lena kept rocking, studying his peaceful face in the dim light from the hallway. She thought about Charlotte, her childhood friend who had seemed to have everything, the big house, the pretty clothes, the perfect life. But Charlotte had always seen past material things, had been the one person who treated Lena like an equal, despite her worn clothes and free lunch tickets at school. Now, here was Charlotte's son, seeking comfort in Lena's arms as if drawn by some invisible thread of fate. The enormity of it all overwhelmed her. This mansion, Alexander's suspicious eyes, Ethan's desperate need for connection, it was all too much, too fast. And yet, looking down at the sleeping child in her lap, Lena felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. Whatever complications tomorrow might bring, right now she could give this little boy what he needed most: the simple comfort of being held and loved. Thunder growled again, more distant now as the storm moved away. Ethan stirred slightly, pressing closer to her warmth. Lena adjusted her hold, supporting his head more comfortably against her shoulder. She knew she should probably carry him back to his own room, but she couldn't bring herself to disturb his peaceful sleep, not when he had finally found some measure of comfort in this confusing day. So she sat there in the quiet, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the weight of him in her arms. Her practical mind told her this situation was impossible. A poor single mom had no place in a billionaire's world. But her heart, the part that remembered Charlotte's friendship and recognized that same pure spirit in Ethan, whispered that some things transcended social barriers and bank accounts. Whatever tomorrow might bring, for this moment, Lena simply held him close, offering the unconditional love that every child deserves. Outside, the storm continued to fade into the distance, leaving behind a night filled with questions and the soft sound of a little boy's peaceful dreams. Morning sunlight streamed through towering windows into the mansion's formal dining hall. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across a table long enough to seat 20, though only 3 places were set. Lena perched uncomfortably on the edge of her chair, feeling out of place among the gleaming silverware and fine china. "More pancakes?" she asked Ethan, who sat beside her, his legs swinging happily as he devoured his breakfast. "Yes, please." His face lit up as she carefully transferred another fluffy pancake to his plate. "Can you put the smiley face on it like before?" Lena arranged strawberries and whipped cream into a simple smile, just as she'd done with the previous ones. "There you go, sweetie." From the head of the table, Alexander watched their interaction with an unreadable expression. His own breakfast sat barely touched, his coffee growing cold. The morning newspaper lay folded beside his plate, forgotten. "You're good with him," he said finally, his deep voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. Lena smoothed Ethan's messy hair. "He makes it easy. He's a wonderful boy." "Lena makes the best pancake faces," Ethan announced, maple syrup dripping down his chin. "Even better than Mrs. Rodriguez." "The housekeeper," Alexander explained, noting Lena's confusion. He dabbed his mouth with a crisp linen napkin. "I haven't seen him eat this well in quite some time." The weight of unspoken grief hung heavy in the air. Ethan seemed oblivious, happily demolishing his breakfast, but Lena noticed how Alexander's shoulders tensed at the implicit mention of Charlotte. "Actually," Alexander continued, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care, "that's something I wanted to discuss with you, Miss Carter. Please, just Lena is fine." "Lena." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Since Charlotte's passing, Ethan has been withdrawn, distant. The therapist says it's normal, but—" His voice grew quieter. "I haven't heard him laugh like this in months." Lena's heart ached for both father and son. The pain of loss was evident in Alexander's carefully controlled expression in the shadows under his eyes. "I know this is highly unusual," he continued, "but I wonder if you might consider staying on for a while, just until Ethan." He gestured vaguely, seemingly uncomfortable showing vulnerability. "Until he adjusts better." Ethan's head snapped up from his plate. "You're staying?" Hope blazed in his young face. "Really?" "Aye." Lena hesitated. Her practical mind raced through obstacles: her job at the diner, her tiny apartment, her entire life existing in a world so different from this one. But looking at Ethan's eager expression, she felt a deeper certainty, a sense that this wasn't mere coincidence. "Please?" Ethan clutched her arm with sticky fingers. "Please, stay?" Alexander cleared his throat. "Of course, you would be compensated. And any arrangements you need to make with your current employment." "It's not about money," Lena said quietly. She looked between father and son. Alexander's carefully masked hope, Ethan's open longing. Something clicked into place in her heart, a feeling of rightness she couldn't explain. "I'd need to speak with my boss at the diner." "Of course," Alexander straightened, slipping back into his more comfortable role of businessman. "Use my office for privacy. Jenkins will show you." The elderly butler materialized silently beside her chair. As Lena rose to follow him, Ethan grabbed her hand. "You'll come back?" "I promise," she assured him, squeezing his small fingers gently. "Just need to make a phone call." Jenkins led her through marble hallways to a stately office lined with leather-bound books. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked immaculately maintained gardens. Lena pulled out her worn cell phone, fingers hovering over the keypad. This was crazy, wasn't it? Staying in a billionaire's mansion because his son had some connection to her through his late mother, her long-lost childhood friend? But as she watched a pair of butterflies dance past the window, she felt that same certainty again. This wasn't just about her anymore. She dialed the familiar number of Joe's Diner, her hands only slightly shaking. Joe's Diner. Joe speaking. "Hi, Joe. It's Lena." She took a deep breath, watching the morning sun glint off the garden fountain. "I need to ask for some time off." The gardens below stretched out like something from a fairy tale. Shaped hedges, stone pathways, and bursts of colorful flowers. Everything about this place felt unreal, yet here she was, standing in it. Her life had somehow shifted overnight into something she barely recognized. "Family emergency," she found herself saying, though the words felt strange on her tongue. But weren't they true, in their own way? Charlotte had been like family once, and now her son needed help that Lena, somehow, seemed uniquely positioned to give. Lena woke to unfamiliar softness. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself wrapped in silken sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Sunlight filtered through cream-colored curtains that stretched from floor to ceiling, making the vast guest suite glow like heaven itself. A gentle knock startled her. "Come in?" Her voice cracked with uncertainty. A uniformed maid entered, pushing a silver cart laden with covered dishes. "Good morning, Miss Carter. Mr. Steele requested you have breakfast served in your room." "Oh, Lena sat up, pulling the plush duvet closer. "That's really not necessary. I could have come down." "It's no trouble at all, ma'am." The maid, Sarah, according to her name tag, efficiently set up a breakfast tray across Lena's lap. She lifted silver covers to reveal fresh fruit, fluffy pancakes, crisp bacon, and what looked like the fanciest omelet Lena had ever seen. "Thank you, but please, call me Lena." She smiled warmly at Sarah, recognizing in the maid's careful movements the same pride in service she carried at the diner. After Sarah left, Lena stared at the feast before her, feeling a knot in her stomach. The fork was real silver, the china delicate and patterned with gold trim. At home, she ate cereal from plastic bowls while standing at her kitchen counter. A happy squeal from down the hall broke through her thoughts. "Lena, you're up." Ethan burst into the room, already dressed in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, his dark curls neatly combed. "Good morning, sunshine." Lena's tension melted at his bright smile. "Want to share my pancakes? Can we?" He climbed onto the bed, careful not to disturb the tray. "Daddy usually has meetings in the morning, but he said I could spend the whole day with you." Lena cut a small piece of pancake and handed him the fork. "What would you like to do today?" "Everything." Ethan's eyes sparkled. "Can we draw? And bake cookies? And read stories?" "That sounds perfect." Lena found herself grinning at his enthusiasm. After breakfast, Lena changed into the clothes Sarah had laundered for her, her simple jeans and sweater feeling oddly plain against the mansion's grandeur. Ethan led her by the hand to what he called the fun room, a spacious area filled with toys, art supplies, and books. They spent the morning drawing together at a low table. Ethan showed remarkable talent for a child his age, carefully sketching what he said was his family. Lena noticed he drew 4 figures himself, his father, his mother in angel wings, and a 4th person she realized was meant to be her. "That's beautiful, Ethan," she said softly, her heart aching. Around noon, they moved to the kitchen. The chef had been given the day off, so Lena helped Ethan measure ingredients for chocolate chip cookies. She showed him how to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, just as she'd taught her own daughter years ago. "You have to be gentle but confident," she explained, guiding his small hands. Neither noticed Alexander standing in the doorway, watching them work. His presence was silent but constant throughout the day, stealing glances from his home office or pausing in hallways to observe their activities. After the cookies cooled, they carried a plate to the library. Ethan curled up next to Lena on a leather sofa as she read from a collection of children's stories. Her voice brought the tales to life, adding different tones for each character. "Just like Mommy used to," Ethan whispered, snuggling closer. Lena's throat tightened. She wrapped an arm around him, continuing to read even as her voice wavered slightly. In moments like these, joy and fear tangled in her chest. Joy at connecting with this sweet child who needed love so desperately. Fear at how quickly she was growing attached, knowing she didn't belong in this world of wealth and privilege. The day passed in a blur of simple pleasures, building with blocks, playing board games, sharing stories. Lena found herself forgetting about the mansion's opulence when focused on Ethan's laughter and creativity. As evening approached, Ethan began to yawn. "Time for bed, sweetheart," Lena said, noting the time on an antique grandfather clock. "Will you tuck me in?" His pleading eyes melted any resistance she might have offered. In his bedroom, a space that could have housed her entire apartment, Lena helped Ethan change into silk pajamas. She sat on the edge of his bed as he brushed his teeth, then listened as he said his prayers. "God bless Daddy and Mommy in heaven. And Lena," he murmured, hands clasped. "Thank you for sending her to us." Lena tucked the covers around him, smoothing his curls back from his forehead. "Sweet dreams, precious boy." "Will you be here tomorrow?" Ethan asked sleepily. "Yes," she promised, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "I'll be here." She pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead, then turned to leave. That's when she saw Alexander in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway light. His usually stern expression had softened, gratitude evident in his eyes as he watched Lena care for his son. Their gazes met briefly, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Whatever complications lay ahead, in this moment they shared a simple truth. Ethan's happiness mattered more than anything else. The silk dress whispered against Lena's skin as she smoothed her hands over the unfamiliar fabric. One of the maids had brought it to her room, explaining it was from Charlotte's old wardrobe. The deep blue color reminded her of summer nights, but wearing her childhood friend's clothes felt strange, like stepping into someone else's life. "You look lovely, miss," the maid said, adjusting the dress's shoulder. "It fits you perfectly." Lena barely recognized herself in the full-length mirror. Her usually practical ponytail had been styled into soft waves, and subtle makeup enhanced her features. But her hands, rough from years of carrying plates and scrubbing tables, gave away her true identity. The grand dining room buzzed with conversation when she entered. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the long mahogany table where Alexander's business associates sat in their designer suits and cocktail dresses. Their chatter dimmed as she approached, replaced by scrutinizing glances. "Ah, Miss Carter." Alexander stood, gesturing to an empty chair beside Ethan. "Please, join us." Ethan's face lit up. "Lena, you look like a princess." A woman in red silk tittered behind her champagne glass. "How quaint." Lena sat carefully, trying to remember which fork to use first. The table setting before her looked like a silver army ready for battle. Ethan reached over and squeezed her hand under the table. "So, Miss Carter," a man with steel-gray hair leaned forward. "Alexander tells us you're a waitress?" "Yes, at Joe's Diner downtown," Lena answered honestly, though her cheeks warmed. "How fascinating," another woman drawled. "And now you're staying here? How fortunate for you." The implied accusation stung, but Lena kept her voice steady. I'm here for Ethan. Of course you are, dear. The woman in red exchanged knowing looks with her companions, though one might wonder about other motivations. Alexander's jaw tightened. But before he could speak, a server presented the first course, something French that Lena couldn't pronounce. It's escargot, someone announced loudly, as if explaining to a child. Snails, though perhaps you're more accustomed to hamburgers? Quiet laughter rippled around the table. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she reached for what she hoped was the correct fork. I had a hamburger for lunch today, Ethan announced proudly. Lena makes the best ones, way better than snails. More snickers followed. Well, isn't that sweet? Teaching him to appreciate simpler tastes. Lena focused on her plate, willing herself not to cry. She'd faced worse in her life than rich people's contempt, but their words cut deeper than she'd expected. Did you know, the gray-haired man spoke again, that Charlotte was quite the socialite? Always perfectly poised, knew exactly how to conduct herself in proper society. The implied comparison hung heavy in the air. Lena accidentally clinked her fork against the fine china, drawing more disapproving glances. Stop being mean! Ethan's voice rang out suddenly. He stood up, his small fists clenched. Lena is nice. She's nicer than all of you. She helped me when I was scared, and she makes me laugh, and she doesn't care about stupid snails. Ethan. Alexander's commanding voice cut through the shocked silence. That's enough. But then he turned to his guests, his tone hardening. Though my son makes an excellent point about kindness, perhaps we could all learn from his example. The rest of dinner passed in tense civility. Lena barely tasted the elaborate courses, each bite sitting like lead in her stomach. She could feel the weighted stares, hear the whispered comments behind manicured hands. When the last plate was cleared, Lena excused herself quietly. She walked with measured steps until she reached the safety of the hallway, then quickened her pace, almost running to her room. Inside, she sank onto the plush window seat, hugging herself in Charlotte's borrowed dress. The fabric felt suffocating now, like a costume she had no right to wear. Through the window, she could see the lights of the city far below, where her real life waited, her small apartment, her diner uniform, her world where she knew who she was. Tears finally spilled over as she remembered Ethan's fierce defense of her. Sweet, broken little Ethan, who somehow saw past her rough edges to something worthy. But maybe those people were right. What could she possibly offer him in this world of wealth and privilege? Her love might be genuine, but was it enough? Lena pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, her reflection blurring with the city lights. The question echoed in her mind, did she truly belong in Ethan's life at all? The silk dress rustled as she curled into herself, no longer feeling beautiful, just lost in a world that wasn't her own. Gray clouds gathered above the sprawling mansion gardens, but the threatening rain didn't seem to bother Ethan. His delighted giggles echoed across the manicured lawn as he twirled with his arms spread wide, trying to catch the first drops that began to fall. Lena stood beside him, her own hands raised to the sky, showing him how to cup his palms just right. Like this, Ethan, she demonstrated, her smile as bright as his. When the raindrops land, they feel like tiny kisses from heaven. Alexander watched them from the covered patio, his usual stern expression softening at the sight. He'd been looking for them after a business call ran long, and now he found himself unable to look away. There was something magical about how Lena transformed the simplest moments into adventures. The rain began to fall more steadily, and Alexander stepped out from under the shelter, walking toward them. His expensive suit would be ruined, but for once, he didn't care. "Daddy," Ethan called out. "Look what Lena taught me." He thrust his tiny hands toward his father, showing off the collected raindrops. "I see," Alexander said, kneeling down to his son's level. "You're quite the expert raindrop catcher now." Lena started to step back, giving father and son space, but Ethan grabbed her hand. "Show Daddy how to do it too." A slight blush colored Lena's cheeks as she demonstrated again, her movements gentle and patient. "It's something Charlotte and I used to do when we were little," she said softly. "We'd spend hours in the rain, making up stories about where each raindrop came from. Alexander's expression changed at the mention of his late wife. But instead of the usual pain that crossed his face, there was a glimmer of curiosity. "You knew her when she was Ethan's age?" "We lived on the same street," Lena nodded, watching Ethan chase a butterfly that braved the drizzle. The Green family house was small, but it had this wonderful front porch with wind chimes. Charlotte would sit there for hours, drawing pictures of people passing by. "She never told me about the wind chimes," Alexander said quietly. "Though she did keep drawing all her life. She used her art to design fundraising campaigns for children's hospitals." Lena's eyes lit up. "That sounds exactly like her. Even when we were kids, she was always trying to help others. Remember the lemonade stand, Ethan?" She turned to the boy who had wandered back to them. "Your mom and I set one up one summer, but instead of keeping the money, she insisted we buy art supplies for the kids at the community center." Ethan absorbed this new information about his mother like a sponge, his eyes wide with wonder. "Did she like butterflies too?" "She loved them," Lena laughed. "She used to say they were proof that beautiful things could come from anywhere." Alexander watched them, seeing his son's face light up with each new detail about Charlotte. For months after her death, he'd struggled to talk about her, afraid of the pain it would bring. But here was Lena, turning memories into bridges instead of walls. She carried that belief into her foundation work, Alexander added, finding his voice. She would visit schools in underprivileged areas, teaching art classes. The board thought it was beneath her position, but Charlotte insisted on being hands-on with every project. That was Charlotte. Lena smiled, wiping rain from her face. Never caring about what anyone thought was proper. She just followed her heart. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Ethan jumped, pressing closer to Lena. She automatically wrapped an arm around him, protective and natural in the gesture. "Perhaps we should head inside," Alexander suggested, but there was no urgency in his tone. The rain had soaked through his jacket, his usually perfect hair plastered to his forehead, yet he seemed more at peace than he had in months. "One more minute," Ethan pleaded. "I want to catch enough raindrops to make a wish." "Is that another thing you and Charlotte did?" Alexander asked Lena, his voice soft with genuine interest. She nodded, her eyes misty with more than just rain. "We believed that if you caught enough raindrops, they'd carry your wishes up to heaven when they evaporated." "Silly, I know." "Not silly," Alexander said firmly. "Beautiful." He held out his own hand, catching several drops. Charlotte would have loved seeing Ethan learn this. They stood there in comfortable silence, 3 figures in the rain, each holding their palms to the sky. The gardens around them glistened, and for a moment, the vast difference between their worlds seemed to wash away with the raindrops. Finally, as the thunder grew closer, they made their way back toward the house. Ethan ran ahead, excited to tell the cook about his raindrop collection. Alexander turned to Lena, his usual guard down. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me that remembering Charlotte doesn't have to hurt. For teaching Ethan that joy can be found in something as simple as raindrops." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I've spent so long surrounding us with expensive things, thinking they could fill the void she left. But watching you with Ethan, you remind me of the simple happiness Charlotte always tried to show me." Lena touched his arm gently. She never needed expensive things to be happy. She just needed love and the freedom to share it. Alexander nodded, a new understanding passing between them. As they walked back to the house, the rain continued to fall, each drop carrying whispers of memories, wishes, and the possibility of healing. The sleek black Mercedes wound its way through the tree-lined streets of the city's most prestigious neighborhood. Lena sat in the back with Ethan, who bounced excitedly in his booster seat while pointing out landmarks on their way to his school. The morning sun caught the polished gates of Whitmore Academy as they approached, making them gleam like liquid gold. "And that's where we have recess." Ethan's finger pressed against the window, indicating an elaborate playground with equipment Lena had only seen in magazines. "And over there is where we have art class outside when it's nice." Alexander guided the car into a parking spot near the front entrance. The building looked more like a small castle than a school, with its stone facade and elegant archways. Parents in designer clothes shepherded their children toward the entrance, many doing double takes at the sight of Lena stepping out of Alexander Steele's car. Lena smoothed down her simple blue dress, the nicest one she owned, suddenly aware of how it paled next to the other mother's expensive outfits. She helped Ethan with his backpack, while Alexander came around to join them. "Ready for the tour?" Alexander asked, his hand settling briefly on Lena's shoulder. The gesture wasn't lost on the watching parents, whose whispers grew more animated. Inside, the hallways gleamed with marble floors and walls lined with student artwork in gilded frames. Ethan proudly led them to his classroom, chattering about his friends and favorite subjects. The teacher, Mrs. Bennett, greeted them warmly, though her eyes lingered questioningly on Lena. "This is Lena," Ethan announced before anyone could say anything. "She's family now." A cluster of mothers hovering near the cubbies exchanged loaded glances. One of them, a tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, detached herself from the group and approached them. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor. "Alexander, darling," she said, air kissing his cheek while completely ignoring Lena. "We've missed you at the last few PTA meetings, though I suppose you've been occupied." Her gaze slid dismissively over Lena. "Victoria," Alexander nodded coolly. "Yes, we've been focused on family matters." Victoria's perfectly penciled eyebrows arched. "Family? How interesting." She turned to Lena, her smile sharp as a knife. "And what exactly is your role here? The help, perhaps?" Ethan's small hand gripped Lena's tightly. "She's not help. She's part of our family," Alexander cut in, his voice carrying across the now silent classroom. Several parents had stopped pretending not to listen. "Lena is someone very special to both Ethan and me, and she'll be a regular presence here at Whitmore." Victoria's smile turned brittle. "Well, isn't that lovely? Though one does wonder about the appropriateness of bringing in outside influences. The children here come from very particular backgrounds, you understand. We maintain certain standards. The only standard that matters," Alexander said firmly, "is love. Lena has shown more genuine care for my son in a few weeks than many have in years." His hand found the small of Lena's back, steady and warm. "She's family, Victoria. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." The silence in the room grew thick. Victoria's face flushed pink, but she didn't dare challenge Alexander Steele further. She retreated to her cluster of friends, who immediately huddled closer to whisper. Ethan beamed up at Lena and his father, completely oblivious to the tension. "Can we show Lena the library now? It's got the biggest books ever." They spent the next hour touring the Academy's impressive facilities. Ethan showed off the music room with its baby grand piano, the science lab filled with gleaming equipment, and the Olympic-sized swimming pool. Throughout it all, Lena felt the weight of stares following them, some curious, some disapproving, all measuring her against some invisible standard. But Alexander stayed close, his presence both protective and proud. When they passed other parents, he made a point of introducing Lena warmly. Some responded politely, while others barely concealed their disdain. Through it all, Ethan held her hand and chattered happily, seemingly immunized against the social undercurrents by his pure joy in sharing his school world with Lena. Finally, it was time for classes to begin. Ethan hugged Lena tightly, then Alexander, before bouncing off to join his classmates. As they walked back to the car, Alexander's hand found Lena's elbow, guiding her gently. "You handled that beautifully," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything," Lena replied, thinking of Victoria's cutting remarks. "Exactly. You stayed graceful and dignified, which is more than I can say for some of our supposed elite." His voice carried a hint of disgust. The Mercedes purred to life, and as they pulled away from Whitmore Academy, Lena felt a wonderful warmth spread through her chest. Alexander had called her family. He'd defended her publicly, proudly. For a moment, she could almost believe she belonged in this world of marble halls and manicured lawns. Then they passed a small diner, not unlike the one where she worked, and reality crashed back in. Her uniform still hung in her tiny apartment, waiting for her return. Her checking account still barely covered her bills. The distance between her world and Alexander's suddenly felt vast again, an ocean she could never hope to cross. She glanced down at her simple dress, remembering Victoria's sneering assessment. The warm feeling of belonging began to cool, replaced by the familiar weight of doubt. The morning light streamed through the bay windows of Alexander's home office, casting warm patterns across the polished mahogany desk. Lena sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the opulent surroundings. The walls were lined with degrees and awards, a testament to Alexander's business success. "I've been thinking about what you said," Alexander began, his voice softer than usual, "about the children in your neighborhood having nowhere to go after school." Lena nodded, remembering their conversation from the previous evening. "Most parents work multiple jobs. The kids either stay home alone or wander the streets." Alexander leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What if we could change that? I have a foundation that's looking for meaningful projects to support. You want to help?" Lena's eyes widened with surprise. "No," Alexander corrected, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I want you to help. You know these families, their struggles, their needs. I want you to design the program." Ethan, who had been quietly coloring at a small table nearby, perked up. "Like an art class? Can I help too?" Alexander's eyes softened as he looked at his son. "Of course you can, buddy. Come join us." Ethan scrambled over, climbing onto Lena's lap with his favorite colored pencils in hand. The casual intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on Lena. How natural it felt to have him there, how easily they'd fallen into a family-like rhythm. "Tell me more about your community," Alexander prompted, pulling out a leather-bound notebook. "What do these kids need most?" Lena's initial hesitation melted away as she began to speak. "Art supplies are expensive. Most families can barely afford basic school materials. But it's not just about having paintbrushes and paper. These kids need a safe space to express themselves, to dream." As she talked, Alexander took notes, asking thoughtful questions. Ethan contributed his own ideas, suggesting they needed lots of colors and big tables where everyone can sit together. "What about the old community center on Mason Street?" Lena suggested. "It's been empty for years, but the structure is sound, with some renovation." "Perfect." Alexander pulled up the property details on his computer. "We could transform it into a proper art center. Multiple classrooms, a gallery space for student work." They spent hours developing the plan. Lena drew from her experiences, describing the families she knew, their challenges, their hopes. Alexander's business acumen helped shape their ideas into a viable program structure. "We'll need teachers," Lena said, growing more confident as they worked. "Real artists who can connect with the kids, maybe even some who came from similar backgrounds. And scholarships," Alexander added, "for those who show particular promise. We could partner with local art schools." Ethan moved between them, adding colorful drawings to their growing pile of notes. Stick figures holding hands, rainbow-colored buildings, smiling suns. His excitement was contagious. "Daddy, can we have music too?" he asked, making piano, playing motions with his fingers. "Like my lessons?" "That's brilliant!" Lena exclaimed. "Many of these kids have never had the chance to touch an instrument." Alexander watched them both, something warming in his usually guarded expression. "We'll need a proper name for the program." "The Rainbow Place," Ethan suggested enthusiastically. Lena laughed, ruffling his hair. "How about the Palette Project? Because every child deserves a chance to add their colors to the world." "Perfect," Alexander said softly, looking at Lena with newfound respect. "You'll present it to the foundation board with me tomorrow." "Me?" Lena's insecurity flickered back to life. "But I'm not." "You're exactly who needs to present this," Alexander insisted. "You understand the heart of it. The board needs to hear from someone who knows firsthand what this could mean for these families." Ethan hopped off Lena's lap and went to his father, wrapping his arms around Alexander's neck. "Can we go see the building today, please?" Alexander checked his watch, then nodded. "I'll have James bring the car around. We should see what we're working with." As they gathered their notes, Lena felt a profound sense of purpose wash over her. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she wasn't just a guest or a comfort to Ethan, she was a partner in something meaningful. The following afternoon, Lena stood beside Alexander in the Foundation's boardroom. Her simple navy dress felt out of place among the expensive suits, but Alexander's quiet support helped steady her nerves. The presentation materials were arranged neatly before them, including several of Ethan's drawings, which they'd incorporated to show the program through a child's eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding rooms, "I'd like to introduce Lena Carter. She's designed a program that will transform how we approach arts education in underserved communities." Taking a deep breath, Lena stepped forward. The board members' expressions were neutral, evaluating, but as she began to speak, sharing her vision for the Palette Project, she felt her confidence grow. She spoke from her heart about the children who needed this opportunity, about the power of art to heal and inspire. When she finished, Alexander stepped forward again. Every detail of this program, from the curriculum structure to the community engagement strategies, comes from Miss Carter's insights and experience. She's shown me a perspective I've been missing in our philanthropic efforts. The board members began to nod, several making approving notes. As questions came, Lena answered them with growing assurance, her passion for the project evident in every response. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Ethan in the waiting area outside, giving her 2 thumbs up through the glass. The morning started like any other at the Steele mansion. Sunlight poured through the tall dining room windows, making the silverware gleam. Lena sat at her usual place beside Ethan, who was happily munching on his pancakes. But something felt off. The usual bustling efficiency of the staff had been replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. Martha, the head housekeeper who normally greeted Lena warmly, hurried past without meeting her eyes. 2 younger maids whispered in the corner, shooting furtive glances in her direction before quickly looking away. "Is everything okay?" Lena asked softly when Martha finally approached to refill her coffee cup. The older woman's hands trembled slightly as she poured. "I'm sorry, miss," she murmured, before rushing away. Ethan looked up from his breakfast. "Why is everyone acting weird?" Before Lena could answer, Alexander strode into the dining room. His face was tight with tension, a tabloid magazine crushed in his fist. He stopped short when he saw Ethan. "Son, why don't you go finish breakfast in the kitchen?" His voice was carefully controlled. Ethan's face fell. "But I want to stay with Lena. Now, please." Alexander's tone left no room for argument. Once Ethan had grudgingly left, Alexander tossed the magazine onto the table. Lena's heart stopped when she saw the cover. There she was, holding Ethan's hand in the park, but the photo was clearly taken with a long lens and made to look secretive. The headline screamed, "Waitress snares billionaire using child." Her hands shook as she opened the magazine. Inside were more photos, her hugging Ethan after his school play, walking with him in the garden, the 2 of them laughing together in town. Normal, innocent moments, twisted into something ugly. The article painted her as a calculating gold digger who had manipulated her way into the Steele household by exploiting a grieving child's vulnerability. "Alexander, you know none of this is true," Lena whispered, her voice breaking. He paced the length of the dining room, his shoulders rigid. "Of course I know that. But my PR team is in crisis mode. The stories everywhere. Social media, news sites, morning shows. My phone's been ringing since dawn, with board members and investors demanding explanations. What do they want you to explain? That you showed kindness to an old friend of your late wife? That you put your son's happiness first? It's not that simple." Alexander ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "My company's stock is already down 3 points. The foundation's biggest donors are threatening to pull out. They're saying I've shown poor judgment, that I've allowed a gold digger to take advantage of you?" Lena finished quietly. Alexander wouldn't meet her eyes. "The board wants me to release a statement immediately, distancing myself from the situation. And what do you want to do?" His silence was deafening. Throughout the day, the whispers and sideways glances continued. Lena's phone buzzed constantly with messages from unknown numbers, some calling her horrible names, others making threats. She deleted her social media accounts after seeing herself branded as Gold Digger Nanny and Waitress Witch. That afternoon, a sleek town car pulled up to the mansion. a group of impeccably dressed women emerged. Wives of Alexander's business associates. Lena recognized several from that uncomfortable dinner weeks ago. They swept past her in the foyer as if she were invisible, their designer heels clicking on the marble floor. She couldn't help but overhear their conversation with Alexander in his study. "Really, Alexander? What were you thinking?" One woman's sharp voice carried through the door. "Letting some waitress get so close to Ethan? The poor child is obviously confused and vulnerable. She's practically living here. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" another added. "Charlotte would be horrified," a third voice declared. "To see her son being used this way." Lena pressed her hands to her ears, unable to listen anymore. She fled to her room, where Ethan found her later, curled up in the window seat. "Why are you crying?" he asked, climbing up beside her. She quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm just a little sad today, sweetheart. Is it because of those mean ladies? I heard them saying bad things about you." His small face clouded with anger. "They're wrong. You're the nicest person ever. Even Daddy says so." Lena hugged him tightly, breathing in his familiar sweet scent. Sometimes grown-ups make things complicated when they don't need to be. That evening, she waited until the house was quiet. She packed her few belongings into her old duffel bag, leaving behind all the beautiful clothes that had been bought for her. On the nightstand, she placed a note. "Dear Ethan, I'm sorry I had to go. Please know that meeting you was one of the greatest gifts of my life. Be brave and kind, always. Love, Lena." She hesitated, then added a second note. "Alexander, thank you for opening your home to me. I understand the position you're in. Ethan needs stability, not controversy. I won't let my presence harm your family any further." The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight as she crept down the back stairs. Martha stood in the kitchen, as if waiting for her. "You don't have to go, dear," the housekeeper said softly. Lena gave her a sad smile. "Yes, I do." She slipped out through the kitchen door into the cool night air. The gravel crunched under her feet as she walked down the long driveway, past the manicured gardens where she and Ethan had caught raindrops, past the spot where Alexander had first defended her to his peers. At the gate, she turned for one last look at the mansion glowing softly in the darkness. Somewhere up there, Ethan slept peacefully, unaware his world was about to change again. Her heart ached, but she squared her shoulders and walked on into the night. Lena's apartment felt smaller than she remembered. The faded wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, and the window that never quite shut properly. It all seemed to close in around her after the grandeur of the steel mansion. She placed her single bag on the worn couch and tried not to think about the silk sheets and marble countertops she'd left behind. Morning came too quickly. Lena pulled on her blue diner uniform, the polyester fabric scratchy against her skin. The familiar weight of her name tag felt heavier than before. She smoothed her hair back into a neat ponytail, just as she had done hundreds of times before, and tried to square her shoulders. "You've done nothing wrong," she whispered to her reflection. The bell above the diner door chimed as she pushed it open. Her co-workers' eyes darted away quickly, too quickly. Some pretended to be busy wiping already clean tables. Others suddenly found the coffee maker fascinating. "Welcome back, Lena," her manager Mike said, his voice gentle but awkward. "Your regular section is ready." She nodded, throat tight, and grabbed her order pad. The morning rush began, and for a while, the routine of taking orders and delivering plates helped her forget. But then she noticed the newspapers. They were everywhere, on tables, peeking out of purses, folded under arms. That horrible headline screamed at her from every angle. "Can you believe it?" she overheard a regular customer whisper to her friend. "Using that poor little boy like that? And she seemed so nice," another replied, not bothering to lower her voice. Lena's hands shook as she poured coffee. Some spilled onto the saucer, and she quickly wiped it away, blinking back tears. The whispers followed her throughout her shift. Pointing fingers, disapproving looks, heads shaking in judgment. During her break, she sat alone in the back alley, her sandwich untouched. The brick wall behind her was cool against her back, grounding her. She closed her eyes, remembering Ethan's laughter as they baked cookies in that enormous kitchen, the way his small hand felt in hers as they walked through the garden. The memory hurt. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Lena?" A small, familiar voice whispered. Her heart clenched. "Ethan? Sweetheart, is that you?" "I miss you," he said, his voice breaking. "Why did you leave? Please come back. I'll be good, I promise." Lena pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Oh, honey, you are good. You're so good. This isn't about you at all." "Then why?" She could hear him crying now. "Daddy's sad too. He just sits in his office. Please come home." Home. The word echoed in her chest like a physical ache. "Ethan, listen to me. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, even when those choices hurt. But you promised." His voice rose sharply. "You promised you wouldn't leave me." "I'm not leaving you, sweetheart. I'm giving you and your daddy space. Those mean newspapers, they're saying bad things about me. I don't want that to hurt you or your daddy. I don't care what they say. They're lying. I know, honey. But right now, the best thing for you is to stay with your daddy. He loves you so much." "But I need you too," Ethan whispered. Lena wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I'm always here if you need me. Always. But right now, I need you to be brave. Can you do that for me?" She heard him sniffling. "I guess. That's my boy. I love you, Ethan. Don't ever forget that." "I love you too," he said, his voice small and far away. After the call ended, Lena sat there for a long time, her sandwich growing stale beside her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows in the alley, and the sounds of the city, cars honking, people shouting, life going on, seemed distant and unreal. That evening, in her tiny bedroom, Lena knelt beside her bed. Her old Bible, its cover worn soft with use, lay open before her. The pages were dotted with tears as she traced familiar verses with her finger. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't understand your plan, but I trust you. Please, please, watch over Ethan. Help him understand. Help Alexander." Her voice caught. "Help me be strong enough to do what's right, even when it hurts." She clutched the Bible to her chest, feeling the familiar leather against her heart. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the occasional siren. Her small bedside lamp cast a warm circle of light, but beyond it, shadows gathered in the corners. She stayed there, on her knees, praying for guidance, for peace, for the strength to keep her heart open despite the pain. The Bible in her hands was her mother's once, its margins filled with notes in faded ink. Now it held her own notes, too, her questions, her hopes, her struggles. She clung to it like an anchor in a storm, remembering all the times before when faith had carried her through impossible situations. But none of those situations had felt quite like this. None had involved a little boy's broken heart, or a man whose silence spoke louder than words, or a love that had grown so quietly she hadn't noticed until it was too late. The grand dining room of the steel mansion echoed with silence. Alexander sat at the head of the long mahogany table, watching his son push food around his plate without taking a single bite. The boy's shoulders slumped, his usual spark completely gone. "Ethan, please eat something," Alexander said, trying to keep his voice gentle. "Cook made your favorite pasta." Ethan just shook his head, his fork scraping against the expensive china. "I'm not hungry." The butler appeared at Alexander's elbow, speaking in hushed tones. "Sir, Miss Chen, Ethan's math tutor, is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Alexander nodded, his stomach tightening. Rising from the table, he squeezed Ethan's shoulder as he passed. "Try just a few bites for me, okay?" In his study, Miss Chen stood wringing her hands, her usually neat appearance somewhat disheveled. "Mr. Steele, I'm very concerned about Ethan. He's completely withdrawn in our sessions. His last 3 assignments were left blank, and today he just put his head down and cried." Alexander sank into his leather chair, running a hand through his hair. "Has he said anything?" "He keeps asking for Miss Carter." Miss Chen's voice softened. "He told me she used to help him with his homework, make it fun with little games and stories." After dismissing the tutor, Alexander walked the quiet halls of his mansion. Everything felt colder, emptier since Lena left. He paused at the kitchen, remembering how she'd filled it with warmth and laughter, teaching Ethan to bake cookies on a rainy afternoon. The sophisticated appliances now stood silent, unused, except by staff. The swimming instructor's report came next. "Ethan skipped his lesson again, sir. He says he doesn't want to swim anymore." "But he loves swimming," Alexander protested. He said it's not fun without Miss Carter watching and cheering for him. Each report hit Alexander like a physical blow. The piano teacher, Ethan refused to practice. The gardener, Ethan, no longer helped tend his little patch of flowers. The housekeeper, Ethan barely touched his toys, spending hours just staring out windows. That evening, Alexander found himself in Ethan's room, watching his son clutch the teddy bear Lena had fixed for him, sewing up a torn seam with such tender care. The boy's eyes were red from crying. "I miss her, Daddy," Ethan whispered. "Why did she leave us?" Alexander sat on the edge of the bed, his heart aching. She thought it was best. Because of those mean people? The ones who said bad things about her? Ethan's lower lip trembled. "But they were wrong. Lena is good and kind and—" His voice broke into fresh sobs. Holding his son close, Alexander remembered Lena's words from their conversations in the garden. "Money can't buy happiness," she'd said, watching Ethan chase butterflies. "All children really need is love, time, and someone to believe in them." He'd dismissed it then, caught up in his world of wealth and status. But now, surrounded by every luxury money could buy, his son was withering like a flower without sunlight. In his office later that night, Alexander pulled out the folder containing the arts program plans he and Lena had worked on together. Her neat handwriting filled the margins with thoughtful notes. "Focus on building confidence through creativity," and "make sure no child feels left out." Even then, she'd been thinking of others, never herself. While his social circle had sneered at her simple clothes and working-class manner, she'd been radiating a wealth they couldn't comprehend, the richness of a genuine heart. Thunder rumbled outside, and rain began pelting the windows. Alexander walked to the glass, watching lightning illuminate the grounds. The same weather as the day they'd met, when she'd sheltered Ethan with nothing but an old umbrella and boundless compassion. What a fool he'd been, hesitating when the tabloids attacked her. He'd calculated the social cost, weighed public opinion, all while the real treasure, the family warmth she'd brought to their lives, slipped away. Ethan's words from dinner echoed in his mind. Lena said grace makes simple things special. His son had absorbed more wisdom from her in those few weeks than from all the expensive tutors and coaches combined. The rain intensified, streaming down the windows. Alexander pressed his forehead against the cool glass, remembering how Lena had taught Ethan to see shapes in rain droplets, turning even a storm into something magical. His mansion had everything except what mattered most: the sound of genuine laughter, the warmth of unconditional love, the light of sincere joy in his son's eyes. Every room held memories now. The kitchen where she'd shown them how to make hot chocolate from scratch. The library where she'd acted out stories, giving each character a different voice. The garden where she'd helped Ethan plant sunflower seeds, teaching him that patience and care bring the most beautiful rewards. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the vast emptiness of his wealth. Alexander straightened, his reflection in the window showing him a man who'd nearly lost what mattered most because of pride and social pressure. Lena had never asked for anything, never tried to impress anyone. She'd simply loved his son, brought light to their lives, and showed them a different kind of richness, one measured in moments of genuine connection rather than dollars and cents. The storm raged on, but Alexander stood straighter, his decision crystallizing. He wouldn't send a car this time, or his helicopter. No grand gestures or displays of wealth. Lena had taught him that true worth lay in simplicity, in honest hearts and humble actions. He moved to his desk, ignoring the pile of business contracts, waiting for his signature. Instead, he pulled out a simple piece of paper, beginning to write from his heart, letting the rain's rhythm guide his words. It was time to fight for what really mattered. Not his social standing or his business empire, but the chance at genuine happiness for his family. Through the storm's fury, he could almost hear Lena's gentle voice. Sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in the simplest packages. She'd been right about everything, and he'd been too blind to see it until now. Thunder crashed outside his window as Alexander stared into the rain-swept darkness, his heart finally clear about what he needed to do. The mansion's grandeur felt hollow without her warmth to fill it. Without her presence, all his wealth meant nothing. They were just three broken hearts in a beautiful cage, needing her light to make it home. Morning sunlight filtered through the mansion's tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Alexander stood in his home office, his phone in hand. His executive assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "Sir, the board meeting starts in an hour. The Tokyo investors are already waiting in the conference room." "Cancel everything," Alexander said firmly. "Clear my schedule for the day." "But, sir, everything." His voice left no room for argument. Alexander wandered the quiet halls of his mansion, his footsteps echoing against the high ceilings. He paused at Ethan's playroom door, pushing it open slowly. The space felt hollow now. Expensive toys sat untouched on shelves. A half-finished puzzle one Lena had started with Ethan remained on the small table, collecting dust. He picked up a stuffed bear, remembering how Ethan used to carry it everywhere. Now it lay discarded, just like so many other things in this too-big house. His son's laughter, once rare but brought to life by Lena's presence, had vanished again. Moving down the hall, Alexander found himself at Charlotte's closet. He hadn't opened it since her passing. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the handle. Her clothes hung in perfect order: designer dresses, silk blouses, carefully arranged shoes. The faintest trace of her perfume still lingered. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room. "I failed you. Failed to see what really mattered." A memory surfaced. Charlotte in their early days, laughing as they shared pizza on a park bench. She'd been so alive then, so real, but somewhere along the way, he'd let wealth and status become everything. He'd wrapped them both in a golden cage, thinking it meant happiness. Alexander ran his fingers along a cashmere sweater. Charlotte had worn it the day she first brought Ethan home from the hospital. "Money can't love a child," she'd told him then. He hadn't understood until now. He walked to the window, looking out over his manicured gardens. Everything was perfect, pristine, and utterly lifeless. Just like the mansion had become without Lena's warmth. She'd brought something no amount of money could buy: genuine care, simple joy, the ability to make Ethan feel truly seen. In his mind's eye, he saw Lena kneeling in the mud that rainy day, wrapping his son in her only jacket without hesitation. No calculation, no agenda, just pure compassion. While he'd been flying in with his helicopter and security team, she'd been there, holding Ethan close, making him feel safe. Alexander's chest tightened. He'd let his world with its judgments and shallow values drive away the one person who'd brought healing to his broken family. He'd stood silent when they mocked her, hesitated when the tabloids attacked. His pride and position had mattered more than truth. Moving to his desk, he pressed the intercom. "James, prepare the car." He stopped mid-sentence. No, this wasn't right either. All his life, he'd relied on displays of wealth and power. Private helicopters, luxury cars, an army of staff ready to do his bidding. But Lena had shown him a different kind of strength, one that came from humility and genuine connection. The memory of her in Charlotte's borrowed dress at that formal dinner flashed through his mind. She'd been uncomfortable in the expensive fabric, yet her dignity had nothing to do with what she wore. It came from within, from her character, her faith, her capacity to love without conditions. Alexander pressed the intercom again. "James, cancel the car, and tell Peterson not to ready the helicopter." "Sir?" His butler's voice held confusion. "How will you—" "I'll walk." "But sir, it's quite a distance to—" "That's exactly the point, James." Alexander moved to his closet, past the rows of tailored suits. In the back, he found what he was looking for: a simple raincoat. He'd bought it years ago for a camping trip that Charlotte had insisted on, before success had changed everything. Slipping it on, he caught his reflection in the mirror. Without the power suits and careful grooming, he looked human, vulnerable. Perhaps that's what Lena had been trying to show him all along. He picked up his phone, scrolling to the messages from his board members. One by one, he declined their urgent requests. For the first time in years, business could wait. His son needed more than a wealthy father. He needed a dad who understood what truly mattered. At his desk, Alexander pulled out a notepad. He began writing, pouring out the words he should have said when Lena left. No fancy language, no grand promises, just truth from his heart. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his pocket. The morning had brightened into full day. Through his window, Alexander could see his helicopter pad, where his pilot would normally be waiting. The sight of it empty felt right. This time, he wouldn't descend from the sky like some corporate deity. He would walk the streets like any other man, carrying nothing but hope and humility. "James," he called one last time through the intercom, "if anyone asks, tell them I've gone to fix something money can't buy." He stepped out of his office, leaving behind the trappings of power that had become both his shield and his prison. The walk ahead would be long, but for once, Alexander Steele didn't mind. Some journeys needed to be taken on foot, one humble step at a time. Thunder rumbled outside Lena's small apartment as she folded laundry on her worn sofa. The ancient radiator clanked and hissed, barely keeping the chill at bay. Rain pelted against the single window, creating shadows that danced across her tired face. She'd just finished another double shift at the diner, her feet aching in her well-worn shoes. A knock at the door startled her. Lena glanced at the clock. 9:45 p.m. Her heart skipped. No one visited this late, especially not in this weather. Setting aside a stack of uniforms, she approached cautiously. Through the peephole, she saw him. Alexander Steele stood in her dimly lit hallway, completely drenched. His usually impeccable suit clung to his frame, dark hair plastered to his forehead. He carried no umbrella, no briefcase, nothing of the powerful businessman she knew. He looked almost small against the backdrop of her building's peeling wallpaper. Lena's hand trembled as she undid the chain lock. When she opened the door, the harsh fluorescent hallway light cast Alexander's face in sharp relief. Water dripped from his chin onto her welcome mat. "Lena," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please." She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. "Mr. Steele, why are you here?" "Alexander," he corrected softly. "Please, just Alexander." He ran a hand through his wet hair, droplets scattering. "I was wrong, so terribly wrong." Lena's chest tightened. She'd spent days trying to forget the mansion, forget Ethan's smile, forget the warmth that had begun to grow between her and Alexander. "The tabloids were clear enough about what I am," she said, her voice barely steady. "No." Alexander stepped forward, desperate. "I should have defended you immediately. I should have shouted from the rooftops that you were the best thing to happen to us, to Ethan and me. Instead, I let my pride and my fear of scandal silence me." A movement behind Alexander caught Lena's eye. From around the corner appeared a small figure, equally soaked Ethan. Her heart nearly stopped. "Ethan," she gasped. "What are you doing here? You're soaking wet." The boy burst forward, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face in her shirt. His whole body shook with sobs. "Please come back," he begged, his voice muffled against her. "Please, please, please." Lena instinctively enveloped him, her own eyes filling with tears. She looked up at Alexander in shock. "You brought him here? In this weather?" "He insisted," Alexander said, his voice cracking. "When I told him I was coming to find you, he wouldn't stay behind. He ran after the car. I couldn't deny him this chance to see you." Lena ushered them both inside, her maternal instincts taking over despite her reservations. She hurried to her small linen closet, pulling out her only clean towels. "You'll both catch your death," she scolded, wrapping Ethan first. "I don't care," Ethan hiccuped, refusing to let go of her, even as she tried to dry his hair. "I want you to come home." Home. The word pierced Lena's heart. She looked around her tiny apartment, the second-hand furniture, the water stain on the ceiling, the cramped kitchen where she could barely turn around. This was her home, wasn't it? Yet somehow, in those few weeks at the mansion, she'd found something that felt more like home than any place she'd ever known. Lena. Alexander stepped closer, water still dripping from his clothes onto her worn carpet. I've been a fool. I let other people's opinions matter more than what was right in front of me. You brought life back into our home. You showed me what real strength looks like, not in bank accounts or business deals, but in how you love without reservation. Ethan clung tighter to her, his small hands fisting in her shirt. Daddy cries at night now, he whispered, and I can't sleep without your stories. Lena's resolve began to crack. She looked at Alexander, really looked at him. Gone was the imposing billionaire who'd first interrogated her in his mansion. Instead, she saw a vulnerable man, his expensive suit ruined, his carefully maintained image stripped away by rain and desperation. I'm just a waitress, she said softly. My world needs you, Alexander interrupted, taking another step forward. I need you, not as a solution to my problems or a replacement for Charlotte, but as yourself. Just Lena, who teaches my son to catch raindrops and reminds me that the simplest moments can hold the most joy. Ethan looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. Mommy was right, he said. She told me in my dreams that you'd come to take care of us. Please don't leave again. Lena's tears spilled over. She knelt down to Ethan's level, holding his small face in her hands. His cheeks were cold from the rain, but his eyes held such hope it nearly broke her. She pulled him close, feeling his little body shudder with relief as she embraced him. Alexander watched them, and Lena saw tears tracking down his face. This proud man who commanded boardrooms and flew in helicopters was crying in her tiny apartment, all pretense gone. In that moment, she saw not the wealth or the status that had always seemed to separate them, but simply a father who wanted to make his son whole again. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice raw. I'm so sorry, Lena. Ethan's arms tightened around her neck as she held him, and she felt the last of her defenses crumble. Sometimes love came in unexpected packages, through lost little boys in the rain, through memories of old friendships, through proud men learning to kneel. Perhaps this was what Charlotte had known all along, what she'd tried to tell Ethan in whatever way she could. Steam rose from 3 mismatched bowls on Lena's small kitchen table, the vegetable soup's aroma filling her modest apartment. The worn wooden chairs creaked as they sat Alexander in his expensive suit, still damp from the rain, Ethan wearing his private school uniform, and Lena in her simple diner clothes. The contrast between their worlds couldn't have been starker. Ethan blew on his spoonful of soup, his eyes bright with contentment. This is better than Chef Marcus's fancy soup, he declared, referring to the mansion's personal cook. A drop of broth dribbled down his chin, and Lena automatically reached over with a napkin to wipe it away. Alexander watched the simple gesture with a look of wonder. His own bowl sat untouched, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Lena, he began, his voice unusually soft. I've been doing everything wrong. She stirred her soup slowly, not meeting his eyes. The cheap overhead light cast shadows across their faces, but somehow it felt more intimate than all the crystal chandeliers in his mansion. I kept trying to fit you into my world, Alexander continued, when I should have been learning from yours. He gestured at the humble kitchen with its chipped counters and faded curtains. There's more warmth in this room than in my entire house. Ethan nodded vigorously. It feels like home here, he said around a mouthful of soup. Lena's heart clenched at the word home. She'd spent so long feeling inadequate, like she didn't belong in their world of wealth and privilege. But here they were, sitting at her scratch table, eating her simple soup, and something felt right about it. I don't want you to come back as a guest or an employee, Alexander said, finally picking up his spoon. I want you as... He paused, tasting the soup. Surprise flickered across his face. This is incredible. Mom's recipe, Lena said softly. She always said love was the secret ingredient. That's what's been missing, Alexander said, more to himself than to her. He set his spoon down and reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. I want you as a partner, Lena. Not because of your connection to Charlotte, not because of what others might think, but because you've shown me what really matters." Ethan looked between them, hope shining in his eyes. "Does this mean you'll stay with us forever?" he asked Lena. "Please?" Tears welled in Lena's eyes. She remembered the first day in the rain, holding this precious child under the playground slide. How far they'd come since then. How many storms they'd weathered, both literal and metaphorical. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your world is so different from mine." "Then we'll build a new world," Alexander said firmly. "One that takes the best of both. Your compassion, your wisdom about what truly matters. My resources to help others, like that arts program you inspired." He finally let his hand rest on hers. "We'll make something beautiful together." Ethan slid off his chair and came around to Lena's side, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You already make everything beautiful," he said into her shoulder. The simple truth in a child's words broke down her last defenses. Lena pulled Ethan closer with one arm while squeezing Alexander's hand with her free one. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll try." After finishing their soup, they moved to Lena's small living room. The couch was worn but comfortable, its cushions molding around them as they sat together. Ethan insisted on sitting between them, his head resting against Lena's shoulder while his feet pressed against his father's leg. The rain continued its gentle pattern against the windows, but it no longer felt melancholy. Instead, it created a cozy cocoon around them, a soft percussion accompanying their quiet conversation. They talked about simple things, Ethan's favorite books, the flowers Lena wanted to plant in spring, Alexander's childhood dream of being a painter before the family business claimed him. The evening grew later, and Ethan's responses became sleepier. His eyes fluttered closed, then open, then closed again. Alexander started to say they should leave, but Lena shook her head. "Let him rest," she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Ethan drift deeper into sleep. Alexander's arm stretched along the back of the couch, his fingers barely touching Lena's shoulder. The touch was tentative, but full of promise, like the first ray of sun after a long storm. Lena felt her own eyes growing heavy, lulled by the warmth of Ethan against her side and the steady sound of rain. She tried to fight it, aware of how improper it might seem, but Alexander's voice came soft and soothing. "Rest. We're home." And they were. In this humble apartment, on this worn couch, the three of them drifted into sleep. Ethan secure between them, Alexander's hand still resting light on Lena's shoulder, Lena's cheek pressed against Ethan's hair. A family pieced together by fate, faith, and the courage to reach across the divide between their worlds. The rain continued its gentle lullaby outside, but inside, in the warm circle of their embrace, a storm had finally found its peace. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and possibility as crowds gathered outside the newly renovated community center. What was once a crumbling building in Lena's old neighborhood now stood proudly with its bright murals and gleaming windows. Children pressed their faces against the glass, eager to see the art supplies and musical instruments waiting inside. Lena smoothed her simple navy dress, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at the Steele Carter Arts Program sign above the entrance. Alexander noticed her nervousness and squeezed her hand gently. He looked different today, still commanding in his tailored suit, but softer somehow, his usual stern expression replaced by quiet contentment. "You did this," he whispered. "Your heart made this happen." Ethan bounced between them, practically vibrating with excitement in his little blazer. "Can we cut the ribbon now, please?" He tugged at both their hands, making them laugh. The crowd of neighborhood families parted as they walked toward the red ribbon stretched across the entrance. Lena recognized many faces from her years of serving them at the diner: Mrs. Rodriguez, with her 5 children, Mr. Chen, who ran the corner store, and dozens of others who had struggled alongside her. Now they beamed with pride and hope, their children clutching brand new backpacks filled with art supplies. The mayor handed Alexander the oversized ceremonial scissors, but he passed them to Lena instead. "This is your vision," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You should do the honors." Lena's eyes welled up as she took the scissors. "Together," she insisted, making room for both Alexander and Ethan to hold them with her. The crowd began to count down. 3, 2, 1. The ribbon fell away with a satisfying snip, and cheers erupted. Children surged forward, their laughter echoing through the building as they discovered easels, piano keyboards, and dance studios. Parents wiped away tears, knowing their children would have opportunities they never dreamed possible. Inside, volunteer art teachers welcomed their first students. The walls were lined with photographs, Charlotte's charity work on one side, showing her legacy living on, and on the other, pictures of local children's artwork, representing the future they were building. Ethan tugged on Lena's dress. "Mom, can I show Tommy the music room?" The word "Mom" fell from his lips naturally now, as if it had always belonged there. Each time he said it, Lena's heart swelled with gratitude. "Of course, sweetheart," she smiled, watching him dash off with his friend. Alexander's arm slipped around her waist, and she leaned into him, no longer caring who saw their affection. The wealthy donors, who had arrived in their luxury cars, mingled with neighborhood families over punch and cookies. The barriers that had once seemed so insurmountable were dissolving in this space where art and music spoke a universal language. Mrs. Rodriguez approached them, tears streaming down her face. "My Mercedes, she always wanted to learn piano. Now she can." She hugged Lena tightly, then surprised Alexander by hugging him too. He stiffened for a moment before relaxing into the embrace, learning the beauty of unguarded human connection. Throughout the afternoon, more families shared their stories and dreams. Alexander listened intently to each one, his hand never leaving Lena's. The man who had once led solely with his wallet was learning to lead with his heart. A light rain began to fall outside, pattering against the windows. Children pressed their faces to the glass, creating artwork inspired by the falling drops. Ethan returned to them, his eyes shining with joy. "Did you see the drums? And the painting room? Tommy says his big sister wants to teach art here when she's older." His excitement was contagious, making both Lena and Alexander smile. The ceremonial part of the day was winding down, but the building hummed with activity as families explored every corner. Lena watched a small girl discover her reflection in the dance studio mirrors, twirling in delight. It reminded her of her own childhood dreams, now transformed into something greater than she'd imagined. Alexander checked his watch. "We should head home before the rain gets worse." He pulled out a single umbrella, the same one Lena had used to shelter Ethan that stormy day in the park, now symbolic of their journey. They said their goodbyes, accepting hugs and thank yous from the families. As they stepped outside, Alexander opened the umbrella, large enough for all three of them. Ethan skipped between them, holding both their hands, occasionally jumping in the puddles that were forming on the sidewalk. The gentle rain created a peaceful curtain around them as they walked, choosing this simple moment over the waiting car. Other families hurried past with their own umbrellas, waving and calling out thanks. Each one reminded Lena of how much had changed since that desperate day in the park. "Look!" Ethan pointed up at the sky. "A rainbow!" Sure enough, a faint rainbow arched over the community center, its colors reflected in the puddles at their feet. They paused to admire it, their small family huddled close under their shared umbrella. Lena felt Alexander's arm tighten around her waist, and she turned to find him watching her with soft eyes. No words were needed, their journey had taught them that love spoke loudest in quiet moments like these. Ethan tugged them forward, eager to get home for dinner, and they continued their walk through the gentle rain. Their footsteps fell in sync, three paths merged into one, while behind them, the community center glowed with warmth and promise, a beacon of hope born from an unexpected storm. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Lena Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.